Let's jump right into it. As we always do, we spend 30 minutes digesting stories from the previous month, trying to determine what was relevant for small and medium businesses. In general, the three agenda areas we're kind of be looking at is Office 365 security, ransomware, and business email compromise as vectors by which people were taking advantage of others during the month of May. We had this fine briefing from the Department of Homeland Security regarding Microsoft Office 365 security recommendations. These build upon recommendations that were actually put out Department of Homeland Security and FBI maybe from a year ago also, but they kind of got strengthened a little bit. But a few themes kind of result. There's 8 total recommendations. I'm just going to cover a few of them for brevity here, but we continue to see that organizations do not have their admins with multi-factor authentication turned on. Okay, it's the #1 finding under Secure Score, one of the tools that's available, free tools available to evaluate things. These are people with keys to the kingdom in terms of capabilities to make changes. Please turn on MFA. It's included with Office 365. A second item, and this is non-default for many organizations where their Office 365 has been spun up in the last, I don't know, I think it's been 2 years or so since this became the default, but the logging is not turned on. So they ask you to turn on logging, and furthermore, take a look at the logs as to what's being generated and set it up to create alerts, evaluate the logs for, let's say, malicious logins and things of that nature, and be aware of kind of what's happening around Office 365. And furthermore, they go on to stipulate about disabling legacy protocols. Microsoft has been on record for a while stating that things like POP3 and IMAP, which are on by default, need to be turned off. There's about 15 other legacy protocols that were due to expire and be turned off this October. However, due to the coronavirus, they're no longer going to do that. That said, those legacy protocols are still methods for organizations to be breached in terms of how people can get in. So a lot of recommendations there. Those are just kind of 3. Ask you to look at the security alerts for additional details. This might look like the same slide, but indeed it's something different. CISA also came out, and this is on May 12th, with another alert about top 10 routinely exploited vulnerabilities. And this is less to do with Office 365, although part of it is Office 365. So here's basically what they said. The malicious cyber actors are targeting 3 areas specifically that I wanted you to focus on. 1, unpatched VPNs. Okay, we actually experienced this pretty dramatically in March and April, not as an organization, but with several of our customers that indeed had unpatched VPNs, which obviously is becoming the central area for people to come in from a remote access perspective. March and April also saw us fighting malicious actors targeting organizations who had hasty deployments of Office 365. So, very similar to what was done before, no logging turned on, MFA not on admins, not evaluating logins to see if you're coming in from a foreign country, which is your non-homed country as an organization, POP and IMAP that are there, things of that nature. So a fair amount happening in that space. And then third was, poor employee education is leading to, that is one of many tools, but these phishing exercises are leading to ransomware. Okay, so those are 3 of the 10 most exploited vulnerabilities over the last year. And so with this high profile designation of that, I'm hoping it kind of grabs your attention that these 3 areas are areas for focus, and we'll talk more about what to do in those spaces. But Department of Homeland Security is saying so, good enough for me. And a third slide, and I think our final slide from the Department of Homeland Security is around North Korea and some malicious cyber activity they specifically have been doing and was found on May 12th. This one's kind of interesting. There are 3 pieces of malware called Copperhedge, Tainted Scribe, and Pebble Dash. Okay. Now, if you were to go look at as any one of these, let's say Copperhedge as an example, what you're going to find is the virus signatures for these pieces of malware were provided to something called VirusTotal. And VirusTotal tracks which virus machines and mechanisms can detect these three: Copperhedge, Tainted Scribe, and Pebble Dash. And it was very interesting to us to go out and look a little deeper and find that the malware engines that we typically recommend, WebRoot, which is part of our managed service, Microsoft Defender, which is out there and used with a fair number of customers, as well as Symantec. Those three were three of the 75 engines that did find these pieces of malware well. But if I was looking elsewhere, and I guess I won't go to the site now, but those are hot links for Copperhedge and Tainted Scribe. And I'd ask you to go to VirusTotal's website and take a look. Copperhedge, as an example, there are only 49 engines out of 71 that can detect the virus. FireEye, Palo Alto, Malwarebytes, those were all some of the names that couldn't find it. So amongst the other 20 that were there. There's another 20 that couldn't find Tainted Scribe. And again, it found Palo Alto, could not find it, Acronis, FProtect, things of that nature. So I thought it was good validation and certainly something to recognize that not every provider recognizes and has signatures for virus patterns. I mean, that was May 12th, right? It's 2 weeks later, and they're still not finding it as of this morning when I looked. So not only is your provider maybe being signature based, but how often are you updating signatures? And even, thinking about the idea, is signature based antivirus and anti-malware enough nowadays? And do you need really intelligent engines that aren't going to operate based on signature? So this entire exercise from North Korea is dictated Hidden Cobra. Thought the name was cool, so I put it on the screen, but otherwise no need to know about Hidden Cobra. Just evaluate and take a look at your antivirus and see if it's up to snuff. All right, the next story was a title called Persuasion. Persuasion is because it's using Sway, one of Microsoft Office 365 tools, and specifically this is targeting executives. There's three, trying to think what else. This campaign began around May 1st. So far has hit 156 executives as of May 5th. So early on, reached some pretty high profile folks in various countries, as you see by the graphic there. There's 3 stages to this: the PDF attachment, a legitimate looking file sharing page, and a phishing site. And generally it's asking them to give permission to someone else for around a quarterly bonus, ironically. But I thought it was also kind of interesting looking at the security firm that found this phishing exercise, looked at 1,800 breach investigations over the last year, and these were some of their findings. So on the left-hand side, the top cause for the breach was typically phishing, right? It was almost 40% of the time. But then over on the right-hand side, what do they do after they've got these credentials? Well, first and foremost, and you'll see 31% of the time, they're doing an account takeover. An account takeover means they've got the keys to someone's mailbox and they're likely sending email, right? And either further doing phishing exercises or planting ransomware or doing a business email compromise, meaning they're sending emails outside your organization to your customers with the goal of soliciting money. That's typically where that happens. So propagating and ransomware you'll see as number 2. So 54% of the time or 55% of the time, that's the problem that's happening when you're letting someone log in as your Office 365. So we'll talk further about that, but that's kind of what we're seeing in Persuasion. This one was kind of interesting, Office 365 rogue applications. So this is a little different vector. This is not reliant on your your login to Office 365, but instead it's on your authorization. Once you're in and logged into Office 365, it's reliant on you accepting another application or giving permission to another application. So you can see oftentimes, again, this comes in 3 stages. First, there's a phishing exercise where you get an email and a malicious link. You click on the link, which actually takes you to a legitimate sharing site, maybe SharePoint, Teams, OneDrive, things of that nature. But from there, permissions are asked of you through that, and maybe you can see in the redirect URL, that's part of the malicious link. Oftentimes people aren't obviously looking at the entire link to see what the URL is in there, but in that particular case, you can see it's relinking to officehnoc.com. And from there, the permission is asking for a application to be installed, which certainly every user is entitled to install additional applications into their Office 365 environment, unless you followed our recommendations for the last couple of years has been to recommend disabling the end user ability to grant access to those applications. So again, that's part of our Office 365 setup and security review process, which we'll talk through. But this is kind of another way that even after you've authenticated Office 365, you now have capabilities by default to enable additional applications to come in. And it's through those additional applications that could be rogue that you could enter in additional people into your organization. So phishing email, malicious link, and then the problem comes with regards to the rogue application. And again, all these details are referenced in the articles in the bottom right. I try to provide those, and when you get the PDF of this presentation, you'll have areas to do some further research and diving in if you'd like. Thought we'd kind of shift our attention to RDP ports. RDP ports are great and probably, unfortunately, heavily leveraged right now. I think I've got a later slide that's talking about 150 million people use RDP ports to leverage access to machines. So what's happening here with this particular problem is they're taking advantage of something called the Sarwent malware. And the Sarwent has been out there for a little while, maybe a year and a half, and it's been modified now to do 3 new things. Sounds like a great enhancement. It now creates a new account on each host that it infects. Okay. It now enables the RDP service, and it modifies the firewall rule to allow that RDP access. So the Sarwent malware suddenly was enhanced, right? And is now in small circles. They said it's kind of being tested out. It looks like, and soon to be coming to a theater near you. But the reasons why they're theorizing as to the reasons why RDP service is being put onto this traditional malware, which is becoming pretty common practice. And one of it is the bad actors can take advantage of the RDP access themselves, right? That's kind of theory number 1. Obviously, they would be doing that to steal proprietary data or install ransomware. And indeed, those are the things we're finding is RDP ports get opened, and that's where ransomware is injecting. And so we'll talk later, but that's why we evaluate RDP ports. Second theory is they could rent the RDP access to other cybercrime or ransomware gangs. And third is they can list the RDP endpoints on so-called RDP shops, basically in the marketplace. And they have an example of that listed below. So just know malware is being changed to allow RDP access. Okay. And I think I'm going to skip ahead of this one to kind of chat about the other RDP that was here. So I'm skipping stories here. I misorganized them, but in this particular case, this is where, per reports, I guess it's hundreds of thousands of employees are using RDP, not millions, as I had stated earlier. And especially with the coronavirus and everyone needing to work from home, a lot of people just said, you know what, let's provide you RDP access to your port. Or, over to typical, I think that's 439 is the port. Or they got really tricky and hid it under a different port. And I think I reported last month to you that those ports are well known. It doesn't matter if you hide port numbers. You're not, security through obfuscation is not working. There are scans done on a daily and hourly basis that tell you which ports are open at they don't tell you which organization, but they say this port at this IP address is open. And there are entire databases to say where those ports are. And if you hit it under port 1382 or something like that, I know that it's port 1382 that's open at that IP address, and I absolutely could take advantage of that if desired. So targeting through RDP is absolutely possible. And so at that point, now your only protection is your authentication. Well, great. Along comes this new story here where organizations are using TrickBot to basically brute force your RDP accounts, which signals, so they're basically just trying a bunch of logins and passwords against that. And if they gain access, they gain access. So our recommendations have been and continue to be disable direct RDP ports, right? You want to hide that behind a VPN or other encryption mechanisms at a minimum, or use alternative remote access means. If you do have to use RDP, then please MFA protect that access, right? So that the user can leverage not only what they know, but also a device or something that they have at a minimum to protect their access in there. And third is obviously, turn logging on, detect and audit who's using that RDP port. What country are they coming from? Does it look suspicious? You need to detect and audit your access, especially in this trying time where that's where the flashlight is focused. Which reminds me, this whole discussion here reminds me of a slide I shared back in March that I want to revisit quickly just to rehash this idea. Relative to Office 365, 0.5% of all accounts are compromised every month. Let's rephrase that, okay? If you had 200 users in your account, in your Azure Active Directory, you would expect one of those accounts to be compromised every month. That's just the stats. That's what's been going on for the last 3-5 years, according to Microsoft, who sees billions of logins every day. Furthermore, if the account is compromised, there's a 99.9% chance that it did not have MFA, because MFA is challenging to compromise. Okay. So that's not really the message from today. The message from today really is about how they do it. And I don't think I talked extensively about that before. 40% of the time, okay, they're going to use password spraying. And password spraying is when attackers are just going to use a database of usernames and try logging in with statistically probable passwords. Here we go. 40% will do password replay, which is basically where they're taking breaches of your login credentials out on the dark web, and they're just going to try those credentials against your account. And 20% of the time, they're going to actually do a phishing exercise and determine it. So phishing is not the only way to get there, right? A much easier way is just try a database of known logins and passwords. And we've talked about some ways to prevent poor authentication mechanisms to your Office 365. But ultimately, all of these problems go away when you're leveraging MFA. So let me go back to the story prior to that, just to cover that off. That was the legal firm. So this was kind of interesting. On May 12th, you'll notice that they hacked and got into, and I think the story is they got 756 gig of data for contracts, personal emails, and all the goings on, if you will, of Elton John, Lady Gaga. They had Madonna's screenshot. In fact, looked like they worked with a lot of, high profile Hollywood folks, if you will. And this was a law firm called Grubman, Shire, Michaelis, and Sachs. And furthermore, their website was down, right? And it appears that in addition to the theft of the data on May 12th, they injected ransomware on the firm. Okay, that should be, that is pretty standard practice, as we'll talk about. These hackers are Eastern European. They've got sensitive details, work contracts, confidential settlements, endorsement deals, and so forth. 2 days later, this is where it gets kind of interesting, from May 12th, well, I guess I talked about the method. They infect the network, they steal the data, and they activate the ransomware. We see this each month, right, with customers within our purview, where they're taking out the data and extracting what they can. They're leaving behind ransomware to kind of cover their tracks and create pain, and maybe further extraction mechanism for additional dollars. Ransomware is not their first activity that they'd like to do. So in any case, they took the 756 gig of data and they were mining it, looking at all the good stuff, and they released the Badana contract just to say, hey, this is what we got, and we're asking for 21 million. 2 days later, 42 million, right? They doubled the ransom to 42 million because there was a significant amount of data with regards to Donald Trump. So, they're again escalating. I don't know where the story is going from here. We'll keep following it, but that was kind of being reported, and I thought it was an interesting layout of what typically occurs and what we're typically seeing. Infecting the data, infecting the network, stealing the data, activating the ransomware. All right, we talked about this story, so let's talk about what to do about it. We're going to go to here. I guess where I start is crawl, walk, run, right? There is no silver bullet that solves the problems that we've discussed today, but to recap, business email compromise, Office 365 authentication issues, VPN, ransomware. This is how typically these things get solved. Put a next-gen firewall in there, make sure that you have the latest antivirus and malware. Again, maybe go to that virus total to see if yours is detecting that North Korean virus. Look at your backup, make sure that you have offline policies. You have, we call it the 3-2-1+1, 3 copies of the data and 2 locations. I forget how it goes, with one offline and 1 air-gapped also. Your patch policy should be effective, meaning you should be patching all of your servers and workstations in an under 30-day period. Okay? It should be documented, and you should know where you're at within the patch policy according to a timeline. We have, and we back up, and we enact this for customers in all of the areas that I'm talking about here. Your admin policy should have your admins with MFA. They should be different logins. So there's a number of checkboxes, if you will, with regards to things that are doing, but that's just the crawling. Okay. In the walking stage, you absolutely should be evaluating email on inbound, not only just with regular spam and bulk email and mitigation of known viruses, but you should be looking at unknown viruses. This is what advanced protection. Unknown viruses, malicious links. You should be looking at phishing campaigns. So I ask you to have advanced protection on your email. I ask you to evaluate where people are going on the internet. At this point, no one's at home behind a firewall. They're home behind their home firewall. Do you have protection in place? We've chatted extensively about tools that we use to do that and do what's called DNS filtering and evaluate where people are going. Additional items, and these are, we'll kind of talk, we'll show a slide additionally on these, but taking a look at Office 365, going through 60 different checkbox areas to look for legacy port protocols that are on, doing port scans and making sure RDP ports didn't get turned on within your environment, and doing security awareness training for your employees. So these are some of the crawling and walking phases as we talk about. And there's certainly a lot more to do, even in the crawling and walking spaces. But if you were doing these 10 things, you'd be in a great place and be better than 80% of others. So I guess I wanted to point out also that there are free trials for the items that are kind of checkboxed here in the middle. The security review for Office 365, port scans, and security awareness can all be trials through our website. We're also, for qualified customers, doing trials of Cisco Umbrella. Product is free from Cisco for trial for a few months, and our services would be free for qualified customers for the 30-day trial also. So all things to consider as we try and face some of the stories and challenges from this month. I would point out that we have weekly workshops that we've been doing all through the month of April. We kind of built up and talked about things that were important to remote employees. We've continued that not only through April, but we continued into May. I think as I go here, we talked about DNS filtering and an umbrella on May 6th. On May 13th, we talked about employee productivity and training. Last week, we talked about returning to the office and what are some of the things we should be considering as we return there. And tomorrow, I wanted to highlight the fact that on May 27th here, we will be focused on, it's not advancing any further, but we will be focused on business email compromise and CEO fraud. So under events would be where you register for that. And again, if you have interest in any trials, we have those available to you. We have a website that has a number of coronavirus and employee related items. You'll be getting a copy of this slide deck as participation and registration here. And with that, I want to thank you very much for attending here in May, and hope that if we can help you with any challenges relative to some of the security things and stories that you've heard from May, we'd love to help you. Thank you very much.